3 days before Thanksgiving, I got a phone call from my mother while I was standing outside the officers' barracks. The wind was cold. I still had my flannel shirt on from drills, and my hand was wrapped around a gift I had spent weeks preparing a custom engraved watch for my dad, thanking him for teaching me how to fix things with my hands. I thought she was calling to ask what time I'd be arriving. Instead, she said, "Emma thinks it's better if you sit this one out. Lucas's family will be there, and we really don't want things to look off." I asked what she meant by off. She said, "You know, flannel shirts, working class shoes, the usual." Then her voice lowered, almost like she didn't want to hear herself say it. "This place isn't for losers, Sarah." I stood in silence, pressing the phone tighter against my ear as if I hadn't heard her. But I had. Every word. They didn't know I had just come from a strategic operations briefing at base command. That I had signed off on deployment orders for 3 battle groups. That I was one of the youngest women to ever reach my rank, because they never asked, and I never told them. So I stayed quiet, said okay, hung up, left the box on the kitchen table next to a cold cup of coffee, and spent Thanksgiving morning helping my elderly neighbor fix her garage door while my family toasted to image and reputation in La Jolla. But that evening, while they sat around their perfect table, Lucas stood up, raised a glass, and said, "I just want to thank the woman who saved my career, the reason I'm here tonight. Rear Admiral Sarah Bennett. You should have seen their faces when I walked in wearing the uniform they had no idea I owned. My name is Sarah Bennett. My family thought I was invisible. They thought I wasn't worth a seat at the table. But they were wrong. And tonight I'm going to tell you why. Before I do, let me know you're here with me. Drop a hi in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, don't forget to subscribe. Because sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest truth. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. 3 days before Thanksgiving around 7 p.m., I stood in the corridor behind the officer training facility at Naval Base San Diego. The salty wind from the Pacific cut through my flannel shirt, finding its way beneath the collar like cold fingers tracing a wound. The sodium streetlight outside flickered faintly, casting a yellow glow on the floor tiles. I had just wrapped up the final round of strategic evaluations for the region, my mind still filled with maps, logistics, and command reports. My phone buzzed in my pocket. "Mom, home La Jolla." I stared at the screen for a beat longer than necessary before answering. "Hi, Mom," I said, bracing myself. "Sarah." She began, her voice wrapped in politeness, the way you wrap leftovers you don't plan to eat. "Listen about Thanksgiving dinner." My grip tightened. "Emma's..." Feeling a little overwhelmed, she said, like she was reading a press release. "You know how important this dinner is for her. Lucas will be there. His family comes from a long line of Yale alumni. It's a certain kind of environment." I didn't respond. She cleared her throat. "We just think maybe it's best if you don't come this year. The house will be full, and, well, this place really isn't for people who haven't quite found their footing." That's how she said it. No shouting, no cruelty in her tone. Just that flat, familiar condescension that always landed like a slap. I looked down at the small velvet box I'd brought with me to base that morning, thinking I'd stop by later this week. Inside was the watch I'd had engraved for my father. "Thank you for teaching me how to fix things." I forced a breath. "I understand. Don't take it personally," she added, as if that line had ever worked on anyone. "It's just, we all want to make a good impression." "Of course," I said. Then hung up. I stood there in silence, the wind now howling between the concrete columns. No one in my family knew I was a rear admiral. I hadn't told them. Not when I got my silver star. Not when I took command of the base, and certainly not when I was the one who signed off on logistics Lucas had once completely bungled in his early officer days. To them, I worked some dull admin job on base, maybe HR, maybe forms, something harmless, something quiet. But the The truth sat in the rows of ribbons in my closet in the strategies I'd authored in the $1.3 million portfolio I built from $700 and late-night reading after drills. Still, I stared at that velvet box and placed it back on my kitchen table unopened. A gift without a recipient. A gesture refused. And just as I sat down trying to swallow the bitterness in my chest, my phone vibrated again. One missed call. From Lucas, ex-lieutenant. I hadn't spoken to him in years, not since the day I personally prevented his dishonorable discharge. The irony struck so hard I laughed out loud. But it wasn't a funny kind of laugh. Thanksgiving morning crept in quietly. Light filtered through my kitchen window in thin, cold strips. The kind of morning where silence wasn't peace, it was reminder of absence. I made myself breakfast eggs, burnt toast, black coffee. No candles, no silverware, just a chipped plate and the ticking of the clock. I had planned to go for a run, clear my head with the sound of sneakers on pavement. But the doorbell rang. Unexpected. Sharp. It was Mrs. Thompson, my neighbor. 83 years old, once a nurse in Vietnam and still sharper than most cadets I trained. "Morning, sweetheart," she said, peeking over her thick scarf. Garage doors jammed again. "I know it's a holiday, but—" I didn't let her finish. "Show me," I said. The door was rusted along the rails. The smoke alarm had been beeping for hours, she said. I climbed up a shaky step stool, reset. The wiring replaced the battery, tightened a hinge that was moments from snapping. Then I swept her kitchen, set her thermostat, and tossed a few logs into her fireplace. She handed me a pie on the way out. Homemade. Still warm. "For when you get home," she said, then looked me straight in the eye. "You were military, weren't you? Navy, I can always tell. It's the way you walk. You command space without trying." I froze. "I'd just like things to work," I muttered. But my chest ached. It felt seen. And it made me realize no one in my family had asked if I had plans today. No one wondered if I was okay. But a near stranger, this woman I sometimes waved to from across the hedge, noticed everything they didn't. Driving back, I passed by the old neighborhood. La Jolla had never looked more polished, white columns lit with fairy lights, luxury cars lining the street. And there it was, my childhood home, glowing like a catalog spread. Through the window, I could make out silhouettes moving around the long dining table, the clink of wine glasses, a burst of laughter. Then I saw him. Lucas, standing by the door in a pressed suit glass in hand. He turned his head toward my car. Did he see me, recognize me behind the wheel? Or was it just instinct? I didn't slow down, didn't wave. I just drove past the light into the quiet and back to my home, a 2-bedroom fixer-upper with drafty windows and imperfect floors. But it was mine. And on the table inside the pumpkin pie sat next to the unopened velvet box. Both reminders, one of what was withheld, the other of what I could still give, even if it would never be returned. Thanksgiving afternoon passed without notice. No noise, no laughter, no smell of turkey wafting from an open oven. Just a silence that settled deep into the walls of my little house, the kind that makes you hear the ticking of your own thoughts. I sat at my desk sorting through command memos and logistics reports, trying to keep my mind occupied. Eventually, I gave up and opened my laptop, navigating to my investment dashboard. The numbers glowed steady, $1.32 million. I stared at it for a moment, thinking back to the beginning, $700 a secondhand laptop, and hours spent watching finance tutorials late at night after training rotations. It was never about the money. It was about proving that I could build something that no one could take away, something measurable, something real. My phone vibrated beside me. A notification from Mia, a photo of the officers' Thanksgiving table at the base, all smiles and paper crowns, one seat left empty with a plate untouched. Her message followed, "The base misses you. Hope we see you at the ceremony next week." I smiled faintly. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, then typed into my notes app. "Not everyone needs to know who you are, so long as you don't forget." I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. Outside, the sky was turning a muted pink. It was that in-between light, where the day is tired, but the night hasn't yet made its move. An email pinged. Subject line: I owe you a thank you. I opened it. It was from Lucas. He wrote, I mentioned you at dinner tonight. I thought it was time. You've been the quiet giant in the room for too long. I know your family doesn't know, but they should. I read it again slower this time. He was right about one thing my family didn't know. I never gave them the chance. I never wanted to hand them the ammunition to turn my accomplishments into something they could exploit or distort. And yet the idea of someone else pulling the curtain back on my life made my stomach twist. I wasn't afraid of being seen. I was afraid of being misseen, of being congratulated by the same people who once looked through me. I wasn't sure which would hurt more. I glanced at the clock on the wall. For 20 years, I had trained my mind to be sharp, precise, unwavering under pressure. I had made a life out of making order from chaos. But tonight, the only chaos I couldn't command lived inside my own chest. They called me a failure because they didn't know me. But why did it still sting? I turned off the light in my study and sat in the dark a while, the email still open behind the glow of my screensaver. And in the quiet of that moment, I realized I didn't want recognition. I wanted peace. I wanted the freedom to exist without explanation. But if Lucas said my name out loud tonight, everything would change. And for the first time in years, I wasn't sure if I was ready for that. The knock came just past 8. I opened the door to find Lucas standing there still in his suit, the tie now loosened and his expression unreadable. Behind him, the November wind tugged at the tails of his coat. I didn't think you'd answer, he said. You're lucky I did. He offered a crooked smile. You got my email. I did. I meant it. You should come. Just for a bit. You deserve to be there. I said some things about you tonight that they needed to hear. I crossed my arms. And they believed you. I think they were too stunned to do anything else. But Sarah, just come. Let them see what they've overlooked. I didn't respond right away. My eyes drifted to the closet by the door where my dress uniform hung sealed in plastic. It hadn't been worn outside base in years. Not because it didn't fit, but because it said too much. An hour later, I stepped into the foyer of my parents' house in La Jolla. The chandeliers sparkled overhead. The tables stretched long and symmetrical, covered in white linen polished silver, and glasses half filled with expensive wine. The air smelled like rosemary and roasted meat. It was the kind of scene meant to be photographed, admired, envied. But one chair at the end was still empty. No place setting, no anticipation. No one had expected me. As I walked in, heels clicking against the hardwood floor, conversations halted. Lucas stood up, his voice steady as he addressed the room. Everyone, he said, this is Rear Admiral Sarah Bennett. She trained me, saved me. She's the reason I even got the chance to sit here tonight. Silence. My mother dropped her spoon. Emma froze. My father slowly stood, his expression a blank page. Lucas kept going, unaware, or maybe entirely aware, that he was detonating a truth none of them saw coming. He spoke about the military campaigns I'd overseen, the officers I'd mentored, the quiet guidance I'd offered him in the worst chapter of his career. He even mentioned my investments. She taught me how to build something from nothing, he said. And she never asked for credit. My mother blinked, her voice tight. Rear Admiral. Why didn't you tell us? I met her gaze. Maybe because when I was silent, you never asked. Emma stood abruptly. So what, you've been playing some sort of twisted game? Waiting for the perfect dramatic moment to drop the bomb? Like we're characters in one of your stories. I turned to Lucas. Why did you really ask me here? Was it for them? For me? Or just so you wouldn't feel guilty anymore? He looked stunned. And for once, he didn't have a clever reply. I scanned the room. The people I used to call family now staring at me like I was a stranger in disguise. They weren't proud. They were embarrassed. Not by my rank, but by the fact that they hadn't known. That they hadn't bothered to ask. that the narrative they'd built around my supposed failure had just crumbled in front of imported wine and catered turkey. I didn't stay long. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of the empty chair at the end of the table. Still bare, still without a plate. A chair no one had thought to set. I realized then it was never about the uniform. It was about who they thought deserved a seat. And tonight, they made it clear. It had never been me. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, I walked past the operations wing at Naval Base San Diego with the same posture I'd held for 20 years back, straight steps measured head high. But something in the air felt different now. The greetings from junior officers weren't as crisp. A few salutes hesitated. One young lieutenant avoided eye contact altogether. I didn't need a briefing to understand what was happening. By the time I reached my office, the email was waiting. Subject line: local inquiry. Your comment attached was a headline from a local tabloid site, bright red font screaming decorated naval officer hid identity to manipulate family image in La Jolla power circle. The article claimed I had exaggerated my service record, inflated my finances, and used my rank as leverage in a fabricated family feud. They quoted someone close to the matter. Someone who implied I had spent years building a public image to overshadow my sisters. The quote read, "She kept everything hidden, maybe because she was ashamed of us." The source was listed as Emma Bennett. I sat in silence for a long time, letting the screen go dim. I'd weathered misinformation before. I'd countered baseless rumors and intelligence reports, redirected narratives that endangered lives. But this wasn't a foreign threat. This was personal, and worse, it was effective. Later that afternoon, I caught two ensigns whispering outside the conference room. They quieted when I passed, but one looked up and asked nervously, "Ma'am, is the article true?" I looked him square in the eye. "No," I said, "and I don't owe anyone an explanation." But the truth was, silence wasn't armor anymore. It had become an invitation. A blank space others now rushed to fill. That night, Mia sent me a video. The full version of Emma's interview. The segment that hadn't gone viral. Toward the end, Emma's voice cracked. She said, "My sister always made me feel small. She never said it, never rubbed it in. But she never included me either. And now the whole world knows she's a rear admiral. So what am I? I didn't sleep." The next day, I called Emma and asked to meet. We sat at a cafe in Point Loma, one we used to go to when she was still in high school. I took her there for her 14th birthday. She ordered vanilla cake and black coffee, same as now. She showed up in a cream-colored coat and oversized sunglasses. No warmth, just performance. "I saw the article," I said calmly. Emma sipped her coffee, then looked away. "Did you think I'd lie when they asked me how I felt? I didn't think you'd weaponize it?" She leaned back in her chair. "You don't get it. You've always been above everyone. Even when you were scrubbing floors in boots, you acted like you were on some higher plane. You never let me in. You never shared anything with me." I kept my voice low. "I never wanted to put that weight on you. I thought I was protecting you." "You weren't," she said. "You were protecting yourself. And now, everyone sees you. I'm still just the one who got compared to you at every turn." I nodded slowly. "That may be true. But what you did wasn't just about you. You let the world believe I lied. You framed me as someone who used their career to manipulate the people closest to them. And you did it on purpose." She didn't deny it. I placed my hand on the table. "You didn't have to bring me down to feel valuable. You're my sister. I never saw you as a shadow. But today you acted like someone I wouldn't trust in the field." Her lips trembled for a second, but then she looked away again. I stood up. "I defended you my entire life, even when you didn't ask me to. But you just made me the enemy in a war I never wanted." I left her sitting there, her coffee cooling untouched in the very place we once celebrated her growing up. That evening, I filed a formal request to limit media contact and temporarily suspended my personal accounts. I couldn't control the spin, but I could reclaim my silence, and this time it would be a choice, not a punishment. I walked into my kitchen, past the table where the gift to my father still sat unopened, and for the first time I considered throwing it away. A week passed. The story didn't fade, it multiplied. More blogs picked it up, most of them lazy rewrites of the original article, adding flourishes of fiction to a foundation of betrayal. Forums debated my credibility. A subreddit questioned my military records. A photo of me wearing an old sweatshirt and fixing the electrical panel outside my house surfaced with a caption, "Rear Admiral or handy woman for hire." The comment section was brutal. They called me a fraud, a narcissist, a myth built on borrowed medals and curated stories. Then I received a formal email from Naval Command. They wanted a full report on all recent media coverage, a personal statement verifying my career credentials, and an audit of public-facing statements over the past year. It wasn't disciplinary yet, but it was scrutiny I had never faced before. I called Mia. She was already 5 steps ahead. She traced the origin of the photo to an anonymous account that had uploaded it to a military gossip page. The image metadata matched a phone previously logged into Emma's email. I sat at my desk unmoving. My own sister had not only gone on camera, she had planted seeds behind the scenes. She didn't just speak about me, she orchestrated the conversation. I didn't want to believe it, but belief didn't matter when the evidence was absolute. That night I called my mother. She answered after the second ring. "Sarah, did you know?" I asked. A pause. "She's just hurt," Mom said. "She never thought it would get this far." "And what did you say when reporters called me a liar?" I asked. "I told them you were private, that you kept to yourself, so they'd believe I was hiding something. I thought it would protect you," she whispered. "No," I said. "You thought it would protect the family from admitting they never really saw me." She didn't argue. I ended the call. The next morning, I met Lucas outside a training facility. He was waiting for me, hands in his pockets, guilt written all over his face. "I didn't know what I was stepping into," he said. "When I talked about you at Thanksgiving, I thought I was finally giving you the credit you deserved." "She asked you to change your speech," I said. He nodded. "She said if I didn't, she'd bring up an old reprimand I got early in my service. Nothing career-ending but embarrassing. She said it would balance the narrative." I closed my eyes. Not out of pain, out of exhaustion. "She didn't think it would go this far," he added. But it had. And the damage wasn't abstract anymore. It was my reputation, my career, my name. I thanked him, turned, and walked away without another word. By the time I got home, the sun had set. I sat in the same kitchen chair I'd sat in the night Mom called me a failure, staring at the same velvet box I still hadn't moved. I thought about all the moments I'd bitten my tongue, all the dinners I'd skipped, all the times I'd told myself that silence was strength. But now I knew. Silence had become their excuse, and I was done giving them permission. 2 days after the confrontation with Lucas and the confirmation of Emma's betrayal, I received a message from Naval Command requesting my presence at a communications review panel. It wasn't yet a formal investigation, but the implication was clear: if I didn't take control of the narrative, someone else would. Mia came by that afternoon. She didn't need to say anything. She just placed a stack of documents on my table, slid her laptop over, and said, "We're holding a press briefing. You're going to lead it." We spent hours drafting the speech, every line weighed, every phrase rewritten, not for image but for truth, the truth I had spent years protecting. The morning of the briefing, I opened my phone to find a single text from my father. It read, "Your mother says I should come. I'm not sure, but if you want me there, I will be." It wasn't long, but it was the first time he had reached out on his own since I became an admiral. When I stepped into the base's main hall, the air felt electric. Cameras had been set up in the back, a small crowd of officers and local press seated before the podium. I wore my full ceremonial uniform. The medals rested against my chest, silent reminders of years lived in shadows. I approached the microphone and looked around the room. I didn't see my parents, but I saw Mia standing near the back, arms crossed, steady as always. I began. "I have served my country for over 20 years. I've led men and women through crises, trained officers, buried friends, and stood in silence while others received the praise I never asked for. I've built a home, a portfolio, a quiet life of meaning. I didn't keep my rank a secret because I was ashamed. I kept it quiet because I wanted to be seen as a daughter, a neighbor, a human being, not a title. I wanted the love of my family to be unconditional, not transactional. But my silence was mistaken for shame. And that misunderstanding was weaponized against me. So I stand here today to reclaim that space. I listed my command history campaign deployments, documented financial records, and community service contributions. Then I closed my folder and looked up. I don't need a title to exist. But if wearing this uniform is the only way I'm granted respect by those who share my name, then that's not family. That's an audience. And I've retired from performing. I walked off the stage. The room was still. A moment later, the applause began, not loud, not dramatic, but firm and rising. That evening, the video of the briefing began circulating online. One clip in particular caught fire. Me standing tall saying those last words about family and performance. It was reposted by military networks, women's leadership forums, and even a few mainstream outlets. I received messages from strangers across the country. Women who had been dismissed, minimized, ignored. Young officers who said they felt seen for the first time. Later that night, Mrs. Thompson knocked on my door. In her hand was a worn, black and white photograph of herself in uniform, standing between two other nurses in front of a field tent. "They cut me out of my family's will," she said plainly. "Said I was too aggressive, not soft enough. I spent 10 years fighting for boys in the jungle, and when I came home they told me I ruined their good name." She placed the photo in my hand. "You're living my story, Sarah. But you can end it differently." I didn't cry. I was too tired to cry. But in that quiet space I felt the foundation shift. I had always believed blood mattered most. Now I wasn't sure. Because sometimes the deepest wounds weren't left by enemies. They were left by those we'd once waited for at the front door. And maybe it was time to stop waiting. A week after the briefing, I sent 3 text messages. One to my mother, one to my father, and one to Emma. Dinner. My place. Friday. 6 o'clock. No context. No explanations. Just the time, the place, and the choice to show up. I spent the day preparing the house not to impress, but to reclaim. I cleaned the floors I had laid myself. Lit a single candle, not for ambiance, but for scent. Baked the pumpkin pie from Mrs. Thompson's recipe. Roasted a chicken stuffed with rosemary and lemon. No wine, no crystal, no music. Just 4 chairs and a small wooden table I had sanded and sealed with my own hands. They arrived just after 6. My mother commented on the paint color. My father shuffled his feet in the doorway. Emma stood a few steps behind them, silent. When we sat down, there was a pause just long enough to make everyone uncomfortable. Then my mother said, "The house is very warm, cozy." I looked up. It's what I could build. 2 years of saving, a little drywall, some elbow grease. Not the kind of home people get invited to for Thanksgiving, I guess. My father shifted in his chair. "I should have said something a long time ago. I've watched you, quietly. I saw what you became. I knew. I just didn't know how to face it. Because if you succeeded, what did that make me?" I let his words settle. Then Emma reached into her coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She slid it across the table. "I wrote this after the interview aired," she said. "I didn't send it. I didn't think you'd read it. But I need to say it anyway." She looked down at her plate. "I was jealous. I still am sometimes. You never needed anyone. You never faltered. And that terrified me. I thought if I could just make you less, I might finally feel like more." Her voice cracked. "But I only made things worse. I made you a villain in a story you never wrote." I picked up the paper, but I didn't unfold it. I didn't need to. I said nothing for a long while. Then I placed the letter beside my plate and looked each of them in the eye. I spent my whole life trying to prove I was enough, that I deserved to belong, that I was worthy of being seen, but I don't need your approval anymore. If you want to stay in my life, understand this. I am a Rear Admiral. But more than that, I am Sarah. And I deserve to be loved without needing to perform for it. No one argued. No one defended themselves. We ate in silence. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was sitting at someone else's table waiting to be offered a seat. This was my table, my home, my terms. And this time, no one could take that from me. 3 weeks had passed since the night I served dinner to my family on my terms. Since then, there had been no dramatic declarations, no sudden transformation in our dynamic. We didn't become close, but we had stopped pretending we didn't exist. That, for me, was progress. The invitation to speak at the community center came on a Thursday. It was part of a public series called Women Who Serve. The theme for the session was Standing in Your Silence. When Mia handed me the invitation, I hesitated. I didn't know if I wanted to revisit everything, especially not in public, but something about the title stayed with me. I spent 2 nights drafting my remarks. I didn't write about my medals. I didn't mention my rank. I wrote about silence, about rejection, about what it means to be invisible to the very people you long to be seen by. The morning of the event, I arrived early to the center. The room was modest folding chairs arranged in tight rows, a makeshift podium with chipped paint and walls lined with posters about resilience and representation. I looked at the crowd forming. Officers in civilian clothes, students, mothers, daughters. Then I saw her, my mother, sitting in the front row next to Mrs. Thompson. She wore no makeup, no jewelry. She wasn't performing. Her eyes were already glassy, her hands clasped in her lap. For the first time, she looked like someone who came to listen, not to manage perception. I stepped up to the microphone. I was told once I began that a certain dinner table wasn't a place for failures. I wasn't invited. I wasn't welcomed. But I learned something in that absence. The room held its breath. Sometimes rejection is the best thing that can happen to us, because it forces us to build a life that doesn't depend on someone else pulling out the chair. I paused. The air felt electric and still. I used to believe that silence protected me, that it kept me safe from judgment. But silence can be a cage. And sometimes, to free yourself, you have to name the things that broke you. After I finished, the applause didn't erupt. It rose slowly, thoughtfully. Some stood, some cried. And I stood there not as an officer, but as a woman who had finally named her truth. As the crowd dispersed, a young woman approached me. She was no more than 22, dressed in cadet fatigues with a crease so sharp it looked drawn. Her voice trembled. "Rear Admiral," she said, then corrected herself. "Ma'am, my name's Eliza. I was going to drop out this week. I thought I didn't belong. But today, you showed me that strength doesn't have to be loud to be real." She hugged me before I could respond. I held her tightly. And for the first time in my career, I cried in uniform. Not out of fear or exhaustion or pressure, but because I understood that the weight of influence wasn't about what we achieve, it's about who we give permission to believe in themselves. That night, when I returned home, a package was waiting on my porch. Inside was the navy blue scarf I had bought for my mother before Thanksgiving, the one I never gave her, the one I left folded on the kitchen table after she told me not to come. Wrapped around it was a handwritten note. "I left this on the counter too long, but I need it now more than ever. If you'll let me, I'd like to learn how to be your mother from the beginning." I sat on the steps holding the scarf, the note pressed against my palm. I didn't need her to become someone new. I didn't even need her to get it all right. I just needed the pretending to end. And for once, I felt like it had. 2 months after Thanksgiving, the beach at San Diego looked exactly as it always had, windswept and wide. The ocean stretched out like a quiet witness to everything left unsaid. I organized a small outdoor gathering that day. Not an official event, no banners or microphones. Just a group of young women enrolled in officer programs, a few folding chairs, and the sound of waves colliding gently with the shore. We shared sandwiches and stories. Some talked about deployments, others about what it felt like to be the only woman in the room and how often that room didn't want them there. I didn't prepare remarks. I didn't need to. When it was my turn, I stood and spoke simply. I was once called a burden, a disgrace, an embarrassment to my family. They said I didn't belong at the table. But I'm still standing here, and maybe that's the most beautiful victory of all. No one clapped. They just nodded. Because they understood. Because some of them had heard those same words too. As we packed up, Mia approached with a small box. We thought it was time, she said. Inside was a medal. A formal citation from the base council. Not for battlefield valor or policy work, but for service to the spirit of the force, for mentorship dignity, and leadership under quiet fire. Etched on the back were 6 words. You are not invisible anymore. I closed the box gently and held it to my chest. Not because I needed it, but because it told me they had finally seen the person behind the uniform. That evening, my parents and Emma came for dinner in the backyard. There were no big speeches, just laughter, soft conversation, and the smell of rosemary drifting from the grill. Emma helped me set the table. She didn't say much until I brought out the main dish. I'm learning how to roast chicken, she said. Maybe someday I'll make one for you. And this time everyone will have a seat. I nodded. No ceremony, no forgiveness asked or offered. Just a quiet thread of something beginning. After they left, I returned to the beach alone. The wind had died down, and the stars had begun to stretch across the sky. I stepped onto the sand barefoot. My uniform was folded neatly in the back of the car. For once, I didn't need it to remind anyone of who I was. As the tide rolled in, I whispered into the dusk. I don't need them to love me the way I once wished they would. I just need to know I never became someone else to make them see me. The water touched my feet and then withdrew. The horizon blinked orange against the darkening sky, and for the first time since I could remember, the sea didn't feel cold. It felt like home. Sometimes the loudest victories are the ones no one claps for when you choose peace over proving a point, when you build a life on your own terms, not in search of applause, but in pursuit of truth. And if you've ever had to walk alone just to find where you belong, know that path is still worthy. Thank you for listening. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments and hit follow. Your voice means more than you know.